Hey everyone, my name is Rooster and welcome back to Mechabellum. This is the third and final video in this unit counter series that we're making, and we'll be covering all of the giants as well as the titans that we currently have in the game in this video. Just like the other ones, if you haven't seen them, do check them out. I am going to be showing you basically tier lists that have an S rank for the best counters and then a B rank for okay or situational counters. I'll try and give some explanation as to why I put stuff where I put it. There'll be timestamps down below. If you don't see a unit in there that you believe is a counter, it's not necessarily because I don't think it's a counter, but I try to include the units that I believe work in the most situations, usually work, rather than try to nitpick all of the niche counters that you may be able to find in certain scenarios. Alright, let's get into this, starting with the Vulcan. So here we are, the very first giant on our list, and it is a chaff clearing giant, the Vulcan. As its counters, I have put down in the S tier the Rhino with armor. This actually works really well. It is a bit tricky to play, but if you can manage to kind of find your windows, this will be very potent. The same thing kind of applies to the steel balls and sledgehammers that you will see in the B tier. If you run those with armor, it can be a really nice stalling mechanic. Sabers are going to be in there as well. They're a fantastic DPS unit, kind of the cheapest ones you can find, alongside the Phoenix, which is also going to be in the list, of course. And it just performs well as both a tank to make sure that the Vulcan doesn't hit your chaff, and it has enough damage to be able to get rid of these giants. Phoenix, of course, is going to be in here, just all around great DPS unit. You'll probably see it in almost all of the tier lists in the S column. It is just fantastic. And then we basically start getting into giants that counter the Vulcan, which is almost all of them. Fortress does a great job, has enough DPS, is tanky, can lock up the Vulcan. Melter can sometimes lock up the Vulcan, though it's not really its job, but it has the damage to take out any giant. It is the anti-giant giant, so you'll probably see it a lot as well, just like Phoenix. Worm, kind of like a Fortress, but close range, so also does quite well. Then we have the air unit, of course, the Overlord. You won't see Raiden here because Raiden isn't really meant to deal with large units, apart from Ionize, I know, but I think into Vulcan that doesn't make too much sense. But its bigger brother, the Overlord, is meant to deal with big units. It has the DPS to back it up, so I will put it in this list. And then we have War Factory, basically just an oversized fortress, but does everything better, so you'll see it as well. And then finally we have the Abyss. Now, it's a bit tricky to play at the time of recording. Maybe it gets stronger in the future, but it does perform really well into large units, and so you will see it show up in the tier list every now and then. Now in the B tier, I have steel balls and sledgehammers, kind of for the same reason. They do have some techs that allow them to lock up a Vulcan, but if you click Scorch on the Vulcan, it will usually perform better against these mid-sized units than against something like the Rhino I mentioned, for instance. Of course, Steel Ball does have the damage as well to be able to lock on, but it's a tricky matchup to play, so I didn't really want to put it up in S immediately. Stormcallers also do really well into giants, right? They're easy to hit, so they don't really miss a lot of their rockets, and their DPS is pretty high, so I wanted to include it in here. And then I will also put down Scorpion, kind of for the same reasons as Fortress. It can tank. It's a bit of a cheaper unit, 300 cost, but it does have okay damage and okay tankability to be able to contest Vulcan. I don't think it's quite as good as the other options we mentioned, like the Fortress, like the Worm, like the Factory, but it can work in the right situations. Alright, let's move on to the next giant. And here we are, up next, the Melting Point. Now for the Melter, I will again be including Chaff in the tier list as well. Keep in mind, these are not in any particular order. I've just arranged them by unit cost. It's not that the Crawler is up front. I think it's the best counter against Melter. I just think all of these in the S tier column are equally good options. Now, Crawlers and Fangs obviously will do well into a Melter. It's a single target DPS unit. It's not meant to deal with small units, so Chaff is going to always be a requirement for you to be able to take these guys out and give your DPS a chance to lock on. So what type of DPS would you be looking for? Well, Phoenixens, for instance. They come in a pack of 2, so they're a bit more resilient. They're somewhat annoying for the Melters to take out, but they can get enough damage to be able to take care of these giants. Wasps are mentioned as well, same reason as the Crawlers and the Fangs. They're the air chaff. It's something melters don't like dealing with, so it can be a great option to stall as well. Then we have the melter. It is the anti-giant giant. It is itself a giant, so it does counter itself. A little bit weird, I know, but that is how it is. I also want to put Sandworms with the replicate tech in there. It is kind of a tech that will allow you to deal with melters, because again, they don't like dealing with small units, so if you can manage to burrow and unburrow, then Sandworms actually can be a decent counter. I'll also put the Overlord in there. It is a fantastic air giant for any type of DPS, really, that's required, and so it performs pretty well into the melters in general. Then we move on to the B tier column. I will put Marksman in there because it has access to some good techs like EMP. It cannot range the melter in the long run, but sometimes it can struggle in terms of having enough damage to be able to get rid of these, especially if it's a high level melter. So that's why it's in B. Stormcallers, again, they're good against giants. You might not be able to rely on them because of interception stuff, but it is a good option. You can also use EMP on the storms to kind of get rid of certain melter techs. It is quite a useful unit. Steel balls and sledgehammers are in there. They are quite good into base melter. Again, they're smaller units. Takes a long time for the melter to get through the whole pack. But alas, melter does have access to energy diffraction, which kind of turns that whole matchup on its head. So that's why I want to put it in B, because, well, almost all players have energy diffraction on the tech bar, and it is something that can show up at any moment. So yeah, that's why it's in B. So a bit tricky to play, but you can get it done. Mustangs are going to be in there. Small units, again, they provide good distraction, and with the right items, they might even be able to take down melters. We're going to mention Sabertooth, same reason as with the Vulcan. This time around, though, it doesn't really have that tankability aspect, because obviously if it gets locked by the melter, it'll die, but it does have access to good DPS for a relatively low price point. Hackers, I'm going to mention. They perform decently well into melter. Of course, if it's a big one, it takes a long time to hack, but the hacking of other units will also distract the melter a lot, so that's why hacker tends to do quite well into the melters. Siege mode Scorpions I'm going to mention as well. I haven't played it a lot myself, but I know that it can be a counter that can work. It outranges the melting point. It has access to giant killing techs like the acid attack, so you can try it. And I have seen some people pull it off, just not too familiar with it myself, so I will put it in B tier. EMP Farseer, just a useful thing from drops to think about sometimes. EMP is in general one of the most valuable techs against Melter. I think Melter might be the unit that you want to EMP most out of all of the other units in the roster. So yeah, I just wanted to mention it there. It's a cheap way to get access to that type of effect, and it often will show up in late game drops. War Factory I will mention here as well. I know that that's maybe a bit weird because it's a massive unit and Melter also counters War Factory, but War Factory has enough damage that if it locks Melter, it can often take it out before it even, you know, is anywhere close to dying. And it also has access to unit spawning techs, which are very annoying for a melting point to deal with. So it has some tools to be able to upset this matchup. All right, let's move on. And that brings us to the Fortress. Again, you're going to see the chaff being mentioned here. Both crawlers and fangs. Fortresses don't shoot very fast. I mean, they shoot decently fast, but they're not meant to deal with chaff, generally speaking. So distracting them is going to be a huge part of countering them. Melting points are kind of its nemesis. It's the classic giant matchup, Melter versus Fortress. So it has to make its way into the tier list. Overlord, fantastic against most giants, has a lot of DPS. Fortresses can't really shoot up. I mean, they have anti-air barrage, I know, but generally speaking, Overlords should be fine against that. I will mention the War Factory. It's just a bigger version of Fortress, so of course it will beat it. And Abyss is a nice answer to a line of Fortresses. It does really well into the barriers as well, so I wanted to mention that. Then in the B tier, I will mention Steel Balls. They can do really well into Fortress with the right techs like range and absorption. But if your opponent is running Rocket Punch, then this counter doesn't get as good. So that's why I wanted to put it in B. Stormcallers I'm going to mention as well. They're nice kind of supplementary DPS. Phoenixes can work with Charge Shot, but of course there is the anti-air barrage conundrum. So I didn't want to put it in S because of that. And then I'm going to mention Fortress as well. because that is something that happens at the HIMARS too. You just mirror the Fortress. It is a big, like, giant-based DPS unit, so it performs pretty well into itself. Alright, next up is going to be the Sandworm. And for the Sandworm, it is going to be a similar story. I will mention Crawlers just for distraction, Fangs as well, but I will also mention the Ignite tech on the Fangs, which can be very useful against Sandworms. Sabertooth are going to make their way into the tier list too. They're a lovely way to deal with these worms if you happen to get them, for instance, from a drop. They have plenty of damage, you've got access to the double shot tech, and they in general perform quite well into this giant. Phoenix will make its way into the tier list as well as a lovely counter. Usually the Sandworm player won't have amazing anti-air, and so you will often be able to sometimes just even cheese the round by having air units. Also, Phoenix has access to great DPS techs like Overload, like Charge Shot, and that really does help take these guys down. Fortress is kind of a nemesis to the Sandworm. It has access to great techs. If you have Overload or Double Shot, it'll perform even better. It can spawn Fangs with Ignite. You name it. It's just generally the giant counter to this guy at the same cost at the very least. I'll mention Overlords as well. Same thing as the Phoenix, just a bigger brother, more damage, and harder to take down. And then we have the War Factory as well, which might be the best counter to this guy. It's just, well, it's too tanky to take down for a Sandworm, and it very, very quickly will take care of the worms whenever they get within range. Steel Balls in the B column work sometimes with range, but can be a little bit tricky. So I didn't want to put them up in S. I know that they work every now and then, but I don't think it's as consistent as the other guys that I mentioned. Rhino is worthwhile to mention too. It basically will beat a worm for way less cost. It's just kind of the same unit, but with more DPS available. So Rhino can work. It's a bit tricky, but you can sometimes give it a try from a drop or something like that. And then I'm going to mention Scorpions with Acid, which works pretty well, but it is every now and then somewhat hard to pull off if well, the enemy isn't like fully committed to Sandworms or has some air units. And then Melter can work, sometimes required if the enemy has a very high level Sandworm, but obviously the Replicate tech that we mentioned before can ruin the odds for the Melter. So yeah, I will put it in B tier, but sometimes it is mandatory to buy that. Next up is going to be the Raiden. Now for the Raiden, again, I'm going to be mentioning the Chaff, Crawlers, Fangs. Just lovely to distract this guy. It does have access to things like Chain and Fork, but you're still going to want this to hit Chaff rather than hit your important units. Shielded Fangs are particularly nice against this. I didn't include it here, but I will mention it at least. It will just double the effectiveness against Raiden. AA Marksman is a great DPS option. Allows you to kind of keep your distance, unlike Phoenix, which we're going to be getting to. And gives you that prioritized targeting, which works against almost all of the air units. Mustang, I will mention as well. A tiny unit, so a bit harder for the Raiden to kill, but has access to some lovely techs like range and anti-air, like the Marksman, to DPS these guys down. I'll mention Wasp here as well. Can be used both for distraction with something like Shield, but also can be used to try and take these guys down with range and anti-air. Melters, I'm going to mention, can be a really good counter. I still want to put them up in S because when they're very high level, the Raidens will struggle to take them down. However, EMP can sometimes create problems for the Melter counter, but I still think that it's a unit that deserves to be in the S tier column. I'll also put Raiden into Raiden. This is something that you'll see quite a lot, at least it's the HIMARS, just kind of mirroring the unit, especially if it came from a unit drop. So that is a viable thing to do. And then I'm going to mention Overlord, which is basically the better version of this unit, at least in this matchup, because the Raiden isn't meant to deal big single target DPS. Again, I know ionization exists, but let's forget about that for a bit. And then whereas Overlord is meant to deal with big targets like the Raiden. So it's kind of the air unit that is, yeah, really meant to counteract whatever the Raiden is trying to do. In the B tier, I'm going to be mentioning Phoenixes. They can work, but they're a bit lower range than something like the Marksman. They don't have access to anti-air spec, so that can create problems where sometimes the Raiden will just like kill 3 of your Phoenixes in one go. So the matchup is a bit 50-50. That's why I wanted to put it in B tier. Abyss I will mention as well. I think it works quite well into the Raiden, but ionization exists, and I think that does start becoming a threat when you're talking about Titans. So I didn't want to put it in S tier because of that. It does deal very well with the giant units, but considering ionization is available, it might be a tricky matchup if the opponent runs that. Let's move on to the next air unit, the Overlord. Now for the Overlord, I only have units in the S tier. I couldn't really come up with counters that I think are okay. I either think it is a great counter or it isn't a counter. So again, you're going to be seeing chaff. Both crawlers and fangs, especially shielded fangs, can be very useful. Overlords can miss their targets, much like stormcallers, and that's exactly what the chaff can allow you to do. Also, you don't want these guys to lock onto your main units, and so chaff will be mandatory. AA Marksman makes another appearance here. Lovely against these guys. You've got the prioritized targeting. They're pretty easy to hit since they're 5x5, so they're hard to miss. We're going to mention the Phoenixes here as well. They're much better against Overlords than against Raiden. And Wasp will make an appearance too as another 200 cost air unit. Can be both to distract with the shields, or it can be to try and take these guys down with range and AA. Mustang's another fantastic counter with the range and AA. You can try to intercept Overlords, but I wouldn't really recommend it, at least not at the time of speaking, because they buffed the missile health and I haven't really seen that work out. So I would stick to range and AA on the Mustangs if you want to take these guys down. I will also mention the Melter. I know that Overlord also counters Melter, but it also works the other way around. It's kind of a situation of whoever locks onto whom first. So Melter can take these guys down, but if the Overlord locks onto them first, then obviously it's a different story. And I will mention the Overlord itself, because, well, it's meant to deal with big giants. It has a lot of DPS, and that's exactly what it is itself, a big air giant. Alright, let's move on to the final 2 units, the Titans. And here we are, the very first Titan that we have, the War Factory. Now for its counters, again, chaff is of the essence, because you don't want this guy to lock on to your important guys. I will mention Phoenix, because just like Sandworm boards, oftentimes War Factory boards will be a little bit on the lower end in terms of anti-air capability, so sometimes we'll be able to cheese around. Phoenixes have access to EMP, which is quite strong against this unit as well. So yeah, just overall a great counter. I will mention the Melting Point. If it locks on, it's going to be one of your best mechs that you can buy to be able to deal with this, but it has some tricky matchups if the opponent is running the spawn techs, so be aware. I'm going to mention Ionization Raiden as well. I think that performs really well. I've tried it in some games and it felt quite good. I think that's exactly what Ionization is meant to deal with, these Titan class mechs that we have. Overlord I'm going to mention as well, kind of like the Phoenix, but just a bigger brother. Air units are annoying. Interception doesn't really work that well anymore against Overlords, so I think that they are a fine choice against Factory. You can also mirror the Factory into the Factory. Sometimes you'll have a Battle Factory with carry techs like Range and Overload facing a Factory with the spawn techs. That is a matchup that you can play. It is somewhat meant to also deal with itself. So yeah, I do want to mention it. Abyss is another option. It performs great against massive units that it can hit multiple times with its beam. And, well, that is what the War Factory is. Now in the B column, I'm going to mention some stuff that can sometimes work, but is maybe a little bit tricky to pull off. Steel balls are going to be in there. If they manage to lock on and you have a lot of them, they will actually perform quite well into Factory. But it is somewhat of a tricky matchup because, well, steel balls don't have a lot of range, and if they die, then there goes your DPS. There's also going to be Scorpions in this lineup with the acid attack, of course. Works really well if it connects, but it can be hard to get going because you'll often need range and acid, sometimes even siege mode. It's a big investment. Finally, I'll mention Ignite Vulcan as well. This used to be a thing back when Factory came out and we didn't have Scorpions. People would play range and ignite Vulcans to try and deal with the spawns, especially from the Vulcan, and then if it locks the Vulcan, it also has ignite to deal with that giant. Can work, is more niche these days. It wasn't easy to pull off even back when the Factory came out, so I won't put it in S, but it is sometimes an option if you already have Vulcans on board. Alright, final unit on the list, the Abyss. Now for the Abyss, the list is going to look rather similar to that of the Factory. Again, the Chaff is going to be here. This unit absolutely hates having to target Chaff. It will often miss everything in the lineup of its beam, so be sure to make use of that. Phoenixes, I think, perform quite well against this, and so do Wasps. This unit doesn't particularly like to deal with small air units. It tends to miss a lot of them, apart from Phantom Ray, but that's why I didn't put it in this list. But yeah, Phoenixes and Wasps do really well into this unit. Melting Point, obviously, is going to show up into any Titan. If it gets locked itself, it will typically die, but I mean, that's how these matchups go. Whoever locks on first wins. Ionization, Raiden makes another appearance here. It's great against Titans, and well, that's going to be no different when we're talking about the Air Titan of this game. Also, Overlord, again, similar to Phoenix, just a bigger version, does well into this, and you can try to mirror Abyss into Abyss if you want to. In the B tier column, I will put AA Marksman. It still performs well in terms of locking on, but you need a high-level marksman to pull this off because this is a pretty tanky unit, right? Almost 80k hit points. You will need multiple marksmen of high level to be able to take this down with only the snipers. Mustangs are also quite good against this. They're not ideal. They tend to get hit quite consistently by the beam of the Abyss. So that's why I didn't want to put them in S tier, but they can be useful if you have a lot of them on board. Alright, that actually gets us to the end of this video. We've covered all of the units, and we covered the Giants in this particular one. If you have any questions, please put them down below, and leave a thumbs up if you liked the video. I hope you enjoyed this series. I might try to make other guides in the future. This has taken quite a bit of time, and apologies if I missed some stuff, or yeah, you really wanted to see a particular counter. I'll happily talk about it down below in the comments. If you want to stay up to date with my latest content, please consider subscribing. If you want to see me play live, check me out on Twitch. And with that being said, take care guys, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.